The constellation of the Great Wanderer was just beginning to tilt toward the western horizon when Joran, a young weaver of maps who had never stepped beyond the salt mist of his coastal village, felt a pull that was not of the tide but of the deep, inland silence. He carried with him nothing but a blank scroll of vellum and a charcoal stick, his heart a quiet chamber echoing with the stories of the high, glass-like plateaus that lay far beyond the reach of the sea's salt-heavy breath. As he crested the first ridge of the sun-drenched lowlands, the world transformed from the rhythmic crashing of blue waves into a vast, whispering expanse of amber tall grass that seemed to ripple like a land-bound ocean under the cooling influence of the early autumn sun. It was here, amidst the swaying stalks that smelled of toasted earth and dried clover, that Joran first encountered the creature that would become the heartbeat of his journey, not a predator of shadow, but a wolf whose fur was the exact color of the pre-dawn sky, a muted, iridescent violet gray that seemed to absorb and soften the light around it. The wolf, whom Joran would later come to know through the wordless language of the spirit as Valen, did not approach with the traditional stealth of its kind, but instead sat perfectly still upon a flat outcropping of granite, its tail curled neatly over its paws and its eyes, two orbs of clear, unblinking emerald, fixed upon the horizon where the grass met the sky. Joran stopped, his breath catching not in fear, but in a sudden, profound realization that he was no longer the observer of his own life, but a participant in a much older and more deliberate design. Valen stood with a slow, deliberate grace, his movements like water flowing over smooth river stones, and began to walk toward the north, turning his head just once to ensure that Joran had understood the invitation to follow. The journey that followed was not one of hurried milestones or frantic discovery, but a slow immersion into the textures of the world as they moved from the whispering grass into the valley of painted shadows, where the cliffs were striped with layers of ochre, slate, and crimson. As the days elongated and the air began to carry the sharp, clean scent of high-altitude cedar, Joran found that his need for spoken language was dissolving, replaced by an acute sensitivity to the wolf's subtle shifts in posture and the rhythmic flick of its ears. Valen was a master of the quiet moment, often leading Joran to the edge of a mirror-still pond just as the first stars were beginning to puncture the velvet canopy of the night, allowing the young mapmaker to witness the way the celestial lights danced upon the water's surface like 1,000 silver fireflies. In these moments of shared stillness, Joran began to draw not the geography of the land, but the geography of the soul, tracing the curves of the wolf's patience and the jagged peaks of his own growing courage. They crossed the river of melodies, where the water flowed over hollowed stones that produced a low, harmonic hum, a sound so soothing that Joran felt the last remnants of his coastal anxieties washing away into the current. The wolf would often wade into the shallows, not to hunt, but to stand amidst the swirling eddies, the water parting around his powerful legs like silk, demonstrating to Joran that there was strength in remaining steady while the world moved rapidly around you. As they ascended into the cloud-cradle highlands, the vegetation changed from the lush greens of the valley to the resilient, silver-leaved shrubs that clung to the rocky soil, and Joran noticed that Valen's fur seemed to brighten, catching the higher, thinner light of the mountain sun. The wolf's personality was a quiet architecture of wisdom. He never led Joran into the path of the wind, always finding the lee side of a boulder or the hollowed-out base of a lightning-scarred pine for their nightly rest, showing a protective instinct that was grounded in a deep, elemental knowledge of the environment. One evening, as they sat beneath a sky so crowded with stars that there seemed to be more light than darkness, Joran reached out his hand, palm upward, and Valen rested his heavy, warm chin upon it, the wolf's breath a steady, rhythmic pulse that matched the beating of Joran's own heart. This touch was not an act of domestication, but a bridge built across the chasm of species, a silent pact that they were two travelers sharing a single path through the vastness of the unknown. They moved through the forest of glass needles, where the frost had frozen the dew upon the pine branches into delicate, crystalline structures that tinkled like wind chimes when the breeze moved through them, creating a symphony of light and sound that made Joran feel as though he were walking through a dream crafted by the stars themselves. The wolf moved with an effortless precision through this fragile landscape, never breaking a single ice crystal, teaching Joran that true power lies in the ability to move through the world without causing it harm. As the first true snow began to fall, not in a biting storm, but in large, lazy flakes that drifted down like the feathers of a white owl, the world was muffled into a perfect, holy silence, and Joran felt a sense of belonging that he had never found in the bustling markets of his home. Valen would often stop to nudge a buried root or a hidden patch of moss with his nose, revealing the secret life that continued beneath the frozen surface, a reminder that hope and growth are never truly gone, only resting. The journey took them toward the peak of eternal twilight, a place where the sun seemed to linger on the horizon for hours, painting the snow in shades of lavender, apricot, and soft rose. It was here that Joran realized his map was no longer a collection of lines and symbols, but a record of the emotional shifts he had undergone under Valen's guidance, a chronicle of the transition from a boy who sought to contain the world to a man who was content to be contained by it. The wolf's presence had become the compass by which Joran measured his own internal landscape, finding that the jagged edges of his fear had been smoothed away by the constant, calming influence of his companion. They spent several days in a high-altitude cave lined with soft, dry lichen, watching the clouds roll across the valleys below like a sea of white wool, and Joran felt a profound gratitude for the wolf's silent companionship, which provided more comfort than any words could ever offer. Valen seemed to understand the weight of the Prince Weaver's thoughts, often leaning his massive body against Joran's side during the coldest parts of the night, a living hearth that kept the frost at bay. The emotional connection between them had reached a point of absolute clarity, where a simple tilt of the wolf's head could convey a world of meaning, and a gentle stroke of Joran's hand across Valen's brow was a prayer of thanks. As they began their descent toward the great northern plains, the landscape opened up into a limitless horizon of white, where the earth and sky seemed to merge into a single luminous entity. The air was so cold it felt like a physical weight, yet Joran found that he was warmer than he had ever been, his spirit stoked by the fire of the journey and the steady, unwavering loyalty of the wolf. They encountered a frozen waterfall that looked like a staircase of blue diamonds, and as they stood at its base, the sun caught the ice in such a way that 1,000 tiny rainbows danced across Valen's violet-gray fur, making him look like a creature born of light and winter. Joran realized then that the wolf was not just a guide, but a manifestation of the wild's own desire to be understood and loved, a symbolic bridge between the human heart and the untamed spirit of the world. The return journey was not a retracing of steps, but a continuation of the inward expansion Joran had experienced as they moved through the foothills where the first signs of spring were beginning to stir beneath the melting drifts. The scent of thawing earth and waking sap was a heady, intoxicating perfume that spoke of renewal and the endless cycle of the seasons, and Joran felt a sense of peace so profound that it felt like a physical presence in his chest. Valen's pace became more playful as the weather warmed, the wolf occasionally leaping over fallen logs or chasing the shadows of clouds across the budding meadows, showing a side of his personality that was as light and joyful as the coming spring. They reached the edge of the great cedar forests just as the moon was entering its full pearlescent phase, casting a light so bright that Joran could see the fine veins in the new leaves and the shimmer of the wolf's eyes from across the clearing. It was here, in the cradle of the ancient trees, that the journey reached its emotional summit, a moment of perfect stillness where the past and the future dissolved into a single, eternal present. Joran sat by a small, smokeless fire of dead wood, and Valen came to sit beside him, his head resting on the young man's shoulder as they watched the sparks drift upward toward the waiting stars. There was no need for a final destination, for the journey itself had become the home, a sanctuary of shared breath and silent understanding that existed wherever they stood together. The maps Joran had woven were no longer tools for navigation, but works of art that celebrated the beauty of the unknown and the strength found in the company of a mysterious and wise friend. As the night deepened and the sounds of the forest became a soft, rhythmic lullaby of rustling leaves and distant owls, Joran felt the heavy, comfortable weight of sleep pulling at his eyelids, secure in the knowledge that the wolf would remain as his guardian through the darkness. The bond they had forged was a silent song that resonated through the very marrow of his bones, a melody of trust that had been composed in the high places and tempered in the quiet valleys. Valen's breath was a warm, steady wind against his neck, a reminder that the wild was not something to be feared or conquered, but something to be cherished and protected within the chamber of the heart. The Prince of the Loom had found a royalty that needed no crown, a sovereignty of the spirit that was recognized by the mountains and the stars. As the first light of a new dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Joren drifted into a dreamless, restorative slumber, his hand still resting in the soft, thick fur of the wolf's neck, two lives intertwined in a tapestry of silver and green. The journey would continue with the rising sun, but for now, there was only the peace of the forest, the warmth of the fire, and the steady, loving presence of the wolf who had led a weaver of maps to the center of his own soul. Every breath was a soft sigh of contentment, every heartbeat a gentle drum in the temple of the night, as the world remained in a state of grace, cradled in the arms of the changing seasons and the eternal companionship of the wild. The wolf shifted slightly in his sleep, a soft whine escaping his throat as he dreamed of the high plateaus, and Joren smiled in his own slumber, his fingers twitching in response to the wolf's movement. They were a single story written in the language of the earth, a narrative of quiet wonders and hidden truths that would linger in the air of the forest long after their footprints had faded from the soil. The mountains stood as silent witnesses to their friendship, their peaks glowing with the reflected light of 1,000 years of sunrises, while the rivers carried the echo of their footsteps down to the distant sea. In the heart of the great cedar grove, where the moss was thick and the air was sweet with the scent of old growth, the weaver and the wolf found the ultimate rest, a peace that was as deep as the roots of the trees and as boundless as the sky above. There was nothing left to seek, for everything they required was contained within the circle of their mutual trust, a sanctuary of the spirit that no storm could ever shake and no darkness could ever dim. The stars continued their slow, majestic crawl across the heavens, and the world turned with a gentle, rhythmic grace, carrying the two travelers forward into a future that was as bright and clear as the green eyes of the wolf. The silence of the forest was not an absence of sound, but a presence of meaning, a rich, textured quiet that held the secrets of the stones and the dreams of the sleeping flowers. Joren felt his mind expanding to encompass the entire landscape, the valleys and the peaks becoming a part of his own internal architecture, built upon the foundation of Violin's unwavering strength. The wolf was the anchor that kept him steady in the flow of time, a silver shadow that moved with the precision of a celestial body, guiding him toward a state of being that was as pure and uncomplicated as the first snow. They had walked through the fire of the changing leaves and the ice of the mountain streams, and they had emerged not as separate entities, but as a unified force of nature, a testament to the power of a journey taken with an open heart and a willing spirit. The emotional development of the young mapmaker had reached its zenith, his soul having been tempered in the high, thin air of the peaks and softened by the gentle mists of the valleys, leaving him with a clarity of purpose that was as sharp as the wolf's own instincts. He knew now that the true maps were not those drawn on vellum, but those etched into the memory of the land, the paths of kindness and the trails of understanding that link all living things in a grand, invisible web. Valen opened one emerald eye and looked at the sleeping man beside him, a look of profound, ancient affection crossing his regal features before he settled back into the warmth of their shared nest. The wolf knew that his task was complete, for the weaver had learned to see with the eyes of the forest and hear with the ears of the wind, becoming a true son of the wild who would carry the wisdom of the journey back to the world of men. The connection between them would never fade, a thread of violet and green that would remain vibrant through all the winters and summers to come, a bridge of the spirit that would always lead Joren back to the side of his brother of the wild. As the forest began to wake with the first chirps of the morning birds and the soft rustle of the waking squirrels, the two companions remained in their state of perfect, peaceful repose, a living icon of the harmony that is possible when the human and the animal worlds meet in a gesture of mutual respect. The sun climbed higher, casting long golden fingers through the cedar branches, illuminating the silver-gray fur of the wolf and the weathered, peaceful face of the man, and the world was filled with a soft, radiant warmth that promised a day as beautiful as the journey that had led them here. There was a profound stillness in the air, a sense of a story reaching its natural and satisfying conclusion, yet remaining open to the infinite possibilities of the next chapter. The journey had not been about reaching a destination, but about becoming the destination itself, a place of peace and wisdom that existed within the heart of the traveler. Joran felt the warmth of the sun on his eyelids and the solid, comforting presence of Valen against his side, and he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be, a child of the sea who had found his home in the high, wild places of the world. The wolf was the key that had unlocked the chambers of his heart, and the journey was the light that had filled them, creating a sanctuary of the spirit that would last a lifetime. Every tree, every stone, and every star was a part of their shared history, a witness to the growth and the grace that had defined their time together. As the light grew stronger and the day began in earnest, the two friends stood and stretched, their movements synchronized by weeks of shared travel, and they looked out over the vast, beautiful expanse of the world with eyes that were full of wonder and hearts that were full of love. The path ahead was clear and welcoming, a ribbon of gold and green that led toward the horizon, and they stepped out onto it together, the weaver and the wolf moving with a slow, gentle grace into the bright, unfolding promise of the future. The air was filled with the scent of pine and promise, and the ground was soft beneath their feet, a carpet of needles and moss that welcomed their weight with a gentle sigh. Joran looked at Valen and saw not just an animal, but a partner, a mentor, and a friend whose soul was as vast as the mountains they had crossed. The wolf nudged Joran's hand with a cold, wet nose, a playful reminder to keep moving, and the man laughed, a sound as clear and bright as the mountain streams they had waded through. They walked together through the dappled light of the forest, a silver-gray shadow and a man of the loom, their story a quiet masterpiece of trust and transformation that would be told by the wind to the leaves for generations to come. The world was a place of infinite beauty and endless mystery, and they were the lucky ones who had been chosen to witness its secrets, guided by the wisdom of the wild and the strength of a bond that could never be broken. Every step was a prayer, every breath was a blessing, and every moment was a gift of the earth, shared between two souls who had found their way through the darkness and into the light. The journey of the wolf and the weaver was a testament to the power of the quiet path, the slow unfolding of the spirit, and the enduring beauty of a friendship that knows no boundaries. And as the sun reached its zenith and the world was bathed in a golden midday glow, the two companions continued their walk, disappearing into the heart of the forest, like a dream of peace that was too beautiful to ever end. The story of their travel was etched into the bark of the cedars and the ripples of the rivers, a narrative of the soul that celebrated the quiet strength of the wolf and the growing wisdom of the weaver. It was a tale of silver and emerald, of amber grass and violet-gray fir, of high peaks and deep valleys, and of the profound emotional connection that links all travelers on the road of life. As the day slowly faded into the soft purple twilight and the stars began their nightly vigil once more, the image of the man and the wolf remained in the heart of the listener, a source of comfort and a beacon of peace in a world that is often too loud and too fast. They remind us to slow down, to listen to the whisper of the grass and the song of the stones, and to find the companion who will walk with us through the high places and the low, sharing their warmth and their wisdom until the journey is complete. The night was a gentle cradle of shadows and light, a place of rest and renewal where the spirit could find its own rhythm and its own home, just as Joran and Valen had found theirs. The memory of the journey was a soft, glowing ember in the hearth of the mind, providing warmth and light through the darkest of nights and the coldest of winters. And so, the story of the wolf and the weaver drifts off into the realm of dreams, a peaceful and satisfying conclusion to a journey of the heart, leaving behind a world that is a little bit brighter, a little bit quieter, and a little bit more magical for having been shared. Sleep comes now with the gentleness of the falling snow, a deep and restorative slumber that carries the listener away into the vast, beautiful wilderness of the spirit, where the wolf is always waiting and the path is always clear. In the final moments of the twilight, as the last of the sun's warmth lingered on the skin of the earth, a profound sense of gratitude washed over the landscape, as if the very mountains were exhaling a sigh of relief. The journey had not only changed Joran, but it had in some small, inexplicable way changed the wild itself, knitting the human experience into the fabric of the natural world with a thread of pure intention. Valen walked with his head held high, his emerald eyes reflecting the first of the evening stars, his entire being a testament to the dignity and the grace of the untamed. Joran felt a lightness in his step, that had nothing to do with the thinning air and everything to do with the shedding of his old burdens, his spirit now as unencumbered as the clouds that drifted above the peak of eternal twilight. They had become a part of the local mythology, the spirit of the weaver and the heart of the wolf, a dual entity that represented the perfect balance between the creative mind and the primal soul. The river stones would whisper their names to the current, and the ancient pines would groan their story to the wind, ensuring that the essence of their journey would remain a part of the world's living memory. As they reached the final meadow before the great descent, the grass was silvered by the rising moon, creating a luminous path that seemed to lead directly into the heart of the cosmos. They stood for a moment at the edge of the world, looking out over the tapestry of lights and shadows that made up the kingdom of the night, and they felt a sense of awe that was too deep for tears. The wolf leaned against the man's leg, and the man rested his hand on the wolf's head, a simple, profound gesture that encapsulated all the miles they had traveled and all the quiet moments they had shared. There was a warmth between them that defied the cooling air, a fire of the spirit that would never go out, a light that would guide them through every darkness they might ever encounter. The journey was over, and yet it was just beginning, for the lessons they had learned and the love they had forged would be with them forever, a part of their very essence. They turned and walked into the moonlight, their shadows merging into a single elegant shape on the silvered grass, moving with a peace that passed all understanding. The world was at rest, the stars were in their places, and the weaver and the wolf were home, wherever the path might lead them next. The silence was complete, a beautiful, resonant whole that held the entire universe in its gentle embrace, and in that silence the story of the journey found its final perfect note. Sleep now, for the wolf is watching, the weaver is dreaming, and the world is safe in the arms of the great, wise wild. The transition into the deepest part of the night was like a soft curtain falling over a stage, leaving the two travelers in the intimate velvet enclosure of their shared sanctuary. Joren could feel the cooling of the earth through the soles of his boots, a slow receding of the day's energy that signaled the time for absolute stillness. Valen led him to a small, hidden alcove within the roots of a massive, ancient oak tree where the ground was padded with thick, dry moss that felt like the finest wool. There was no fire tonight, for the air was mild, and the warmth of their proximity was enough to keep the night chill at bay. Joren curled into the space provided by the wolf's body, his head resting on the soft, violet-gray flank, and he felt the slow, powerful expansion and contraction of the animal's ribs as it breathed. This was the true rhythm of life, a steady, unhurried cadence that owed nothing to the frantic clocks of the coastal village. The wolf's scent was a mix of cold water, pine resin, and the dry, sweet smell of the mountain grass, a perfume that Joren had come to associate with safety and profound belonging. He closed his eyes and let the sounds of the night wash over him, the distant call of a nightjar, the soft rustle of the oak leaves, and the rhythmic thrum of the wolf's heart. He thought of the maps he had made, the lines he had drawn with charcoal, and the colors he had imagined for the valleys, and he realized that the most important features were the ones that could not be seen. The height of a mountain was nothing compared to the height of the trust he had reached with Valen, and the depth of a river was shallow compared to the depth of the peace he now felt. The true geography was one of the heart, a landscape of courage, patience, and silent understanding that he would carry with him into every tomorrow. The wolf seemed to sense the direction of his thoughts, letting out a soft, huffing breath that sounded like a word of agreement, a final confirmation of their shared truth. Joren felt his body becoming heavier, sinking into the soft moss and the warm fur, as the boundaries between himself and the world began to blur and fade. He was no longer a weaver of maps, but a part of the map itself, a thread of gold in the vast emerald carpet of the forest. The night was a cradle, the wolf was a brother, and the journey was a song that would never end, even as the singer fell into the deep, quiet waters of sleep. The moon reached the zenith of its path, casting a column of silver light down through the oak branches, illuminating the sleeping pair like a sacred relic of a forgotten age. They were a vision of harmony in a world of discord, a proof that the most different of souls can find a common ground if they are willing to walk the long, quiet path together.